So while Farrah's doing that, how many of you have taken a webinar with me or seen me speak before? Okay, so some of this you'll be like, yeah, I know. You can act all cool, you can answer all the questions, be really smart. It should work, let's see. So I'm in marketing, so if I don't know how to market my own book, that's a problem. So marketing lesson number 1, get people to opt in. If you want free worksheets that go with the book, all you have to do is go to this simple form and give me your name and email address. Of course, I would like the real one, but if you want to fake it, that's fine too. We're releasing a bunch of worksheets one at a time this fall, and then we're going to issue a companion workbook sometime in the spring, but I'm sort of releasing it as I go in bits and pieces. We'll update it all and make it all look pretty and create a little download for you all later. But you can go to kivilm.com/hello to opt in for worksheets if you'd like. So what is content marketing? Anybody feel like they know what content marketing is? I'm getting endless amounts of grief about using this in the book title because nobody knows what it is or what it means. So it makes a really stupid book title, right? Go for it. Well, blogging is one way, certainly, that you can share content that you would use in content marketing. It's really about your approach to the kind of content you create. So I like to think of it like this. Like a lot of nonprofit communication is really about interrupting people. Like you're trying to put your newsletter in front of them. You're really hoping that they'll look at your stuff and take a moment and please read it because we really need you to come to our event. We really need you to donate. We really need you to do a bunch of stuff. And what we really need to be doing is producing such great communications that people are naturally drawn to us, that they see real relevance and value in the communications, so they want to read it. We don't have to hope and pray. We call that spray and pray communications. We don't have to do that anymore because people understand how relevant we are in their lives and they actively seek it. So that's the difference. That's what content marketing really is. It's about communicating in ways that attract people to you naturally instead of feeling like you're constantly having to interrupt them and hope and pray and beg that they will read your stuff. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do all content marketing and no traditional marketing. There are ways to do both, but what I'd like you to think about today is how you can do more of the content marketing that's really going to attract people to you. Now, some of you may be thinking, we're already doing that. And you might be. But again, what I'm encouraging you to do is to do a lot more of it and a lot less of sort of what we would consider that traditional PR kind of communications. Okay, so again, what is the point here? I'm going to go through a couple of the key differences. These are all explained in excruciating detail in the book, which is for sale. And I flew here, people. Do not make me take these back on the plane, please. I will write whatever you want in the book when I sign it. Okay, ask, where's the smartass guy? Where are you? Okay, I wrote to the smartass in his book. I will write anything you want in your book, okay? So I'm going to go through a couple of key differences. Then I'm going to run through the major chapters of the book, and I'll pull out like one or two of the kind of key lessons from the book. So you'll get a pretty good outline of it tonight. And then, of course, I'll take lots of questions. I do have a train to catch, so I know a bunch of you are leaving at 7 because you have another event. I'm leaving no later than 7:30. So we'll make sure we have plenty of time and everybody can get out of here. Okay, so one key difference between content marketing and traditional marketing is what I'm calling the end of the target audience. Now, I still use this terminology occasionally, especially with really newbie marketers who know zero about marketing. It's sort of a convenient way to get them to think about who they're communicating with. But from a content marketing perspective, this is really dangerous terminology because of both words. Let's start with the word audience. What does audience imply? You're sitting down, you're passive, you're looking, right? And I'm talking to you. And there's no two-way communication. You're not having a ton of influence over what I'm doing up here. All this was decided ahead of time, right? So we need to really transform the way we think about the people we communicate with, and thinking of them as an audience I don't think is particularly helpful. I think you want to think of them in a different way. And it's going to depend on your organization. You may think of them as a community member. You may think of them as someone you serve. You may think of them as being sort of more of the family. It just sort of depends on who you are and what you do. But I think the notion of an audience is sort of dangerous. What about the target part? The book is full of advice on segmenting your list. Who wants to tell me what segmenting a list is? Who's got the quick definition of segmenting a list? What does that mean? Yes?
You take a certain part of the constituent base that has certain characteristics.
Right, so you're picking some qualities that these people have in common, and you're sort of pulling out that subset of names. You can use lots of different criteria to segment a list. Sometimes it's pure demographics. We only want to talk to people in a certain zip code. Sometimes it's based on behavior. We only want to talk to people who haven't already registered for the event. There's lots of different ways that you can segment. And that's how you get more relevant, which is a really important part of content marketing. So a lot of the book talks about the idea of targeting through segmenting, but I don't like the word target because it sort of implies that there's this bullseye on your head and I'm going to blast you with the messaging, right? I hate that terminology, e-blast. It's completely the opposite of what I'm really encouraging you to do, okay? So I'm not crazy about the word target audience. I can't say that I have the perfect solution replacement word. I've got one that I suggest in the book, but anyway, just think about it. The second key difference, I think, is really treating your communications as a value exchange, which is really what good marketing is anyway, but I think a lot of us get kind of lazy and just talk about ourselves all the time, talk about our stuff all the time, again, hoping people will look at it. Instead, what I want you to encourage you to do is think about what promise can I make to the people who are liking our Facebook page, signing up for our newsletter. What promise can I make about the kind of content they're going to get when they give me their email address? And then keep that promise by delivering really good content. Okay, again, it's not just about you talking about yourself all the time, pushing your stuff out all the time. It's really about figuring out who these people are that are on these different lists that you're all growing, figuring out who they are, what they want, why they care about you. What is it about them that makes them want to be on your list and a fan of your organization or a participant in your programming? And then make them a promise that they're interested in you keeping and deliver on that. And use your communications to make that happen. The third concept is the power of becoming a favorite cause. There's some great research from N10. There's some great research from a number of other different organizations, all of which is in the book. The book is very heavily documented with all the research you could ever want on this stuff about the power of being a favorite cause. When someone identifies you as their favorite cause, they are much more likely to give you more money, okay? So in the N10 research, I think it was the N10 research, 50% of donors who participated in the research said that they gave their single favorite charity 2/3 of their annual contribution. So there's a lot of numbers in there, and I know it's late. Half of donors, not everybody, half of donors gave their single favorite charity 2/3 of their annual financial philanthropic contributions. Okay, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of power in being somebody's favorite. And how do you become a favorite? That's really what this book is about, and how to use content marketing to make that happen. Okay, any questions so far on kind of these big concepts before we go into the book? I really don't want to just stand up here and rattle on. I'd like to take questions as we go. Anybody feel like this is just complete crap and there's no way you can do any of this? Everybody's all good? Did you guys have too much wine at everything? Okay, it's dark. Okay, be thinking about questions. Okay, so let's look at the book itself then. So it's been a long time since I was backpacking. I've got little kids, and little kids are generally not backpacking friendly people. So we have great hope for the future, my husband and I. But way back in the day, we did a lot of backpacking. So when I was trying to figure out a metaphor to kind of pull all of this together, I chose backpacking. So we have this backpacking metaphor throughout the book. The first section of the book is really about finding the path. And it's really sort of advocating for content marketing. It gives you tons of research about why this is the way to go. So lots of times I'll get messages from people saying, oh, that sounds great, but my boss, he's a real numbers guy. I really need to show him the data. Well, the first part of the book is really for you. If you don't like numbers, don't panic, because the rest of the book is not nearly as heavy as the first part. It's very stat heavy in the first part, because I'm really trying to make the case and really cite all the data for you so you can make the case. So I talk about how it's different. We talk about setting some goals and measuring progress. Let's talk a little bit more just about the case for making the shift. And these bullets represent each chapter in the book. I believe, Thomas, you were going to call out page numbers. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, please don't. Okay, so there's a theory of change. How many of you are sort of familiar with the theory of change model? The theory of change model is just basically that you can connect the dots between your actions and an outcome. So what I'm trying to do here with communications in general and content marketing specifically is show you that theory of change. So step one, you understand your donors' inner angels. I talk about the difference between the inner bookkeeper and the inner angel in the book, because I think a lot of nonprofits are really communicating with the inner bookkeeper. You're using a lot of numbers, you're trying to make a lot of justifications. Various funders in your world have convinced you that's the proper way to communicate. It may be to them. It's really a bad idea for most of your individual donors to communicate to them that way. You need to find the angel within them that is moved emotionally and touched because of something in their own lives that connects them to you. So I talk about that and about really understanding your inner angels. And then you want to create communications that are relevant to them. And we'll talk more about relevance in a little bit. When you do that, you're able to ask them to do things and to think about their broader relationship with you and really give them opportunities to do that magic word, engage. Everybody's talking about engagement now, right? So then when they do that, you start to become their favorite. You have to produce relevant communications. You have to give them more to do than just give. Some of your donors are going to be happy just giving, and that's going to be super fun with them. But a lot of your donors want a more full relationship with you. When you do that, you can become the favorite. And then when you really need their help and you ask, they say yes. They raise their hand because you're their favorite. Your donors that are also your volunteers are much more likely to be better donors for you, however you want to define better donor. And then, guess what? You have the support you need to achieve your mission. Okay, so if you go backwards, it's all about understanding the people on your list. And I've found that when I sit down with nonprofits and ask them, tell me about the people on your newsletter list. Who are these people? What would you say if I asked you that question? Can anybody sort of describe who's on their list? Or are you like, please don't look at me, God, please do not look at me. Do not call on me. I saw a nodding head. So tell me about who's on your list. What are they? What kind of people are they?
They're very socially justice active people. And,
Okay.
So when we put stuff up that's, something about the government shutdown.
Okay.
Goes crazy.
So very social justice activists.
Right.
Why are they that way? Can you go a little deeper?
Well, they join the organization because of that.
Okay, but are they there because they work in the field, or you think they have some personal experience because of where they live, or what are some of the other commonalities that sort of bring people to you specifically as an organization?
Okay, so it's United Methodist Women, and we have
Okay.
deep history in promoting women and change, and bringing about change for women and children mostly.
Okay.
And so, and the history of the organization is kind of being for organization, things are going to get done.
Okay, and I would just hazard a guess, you can tell me if I'm completely off base, that a lot of your best supporters really feel like that is part of their core identity.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Yes.
So that's really important information to know because it allows you to make really strategic choices about the kind of content you deliver. It's going to be so much easier for you to do your job just because you know what you said. And I bet you know a whole lot more about those people. Makes your job super easy compared to some of you in the room who have no idea who's on your list. And it may be because you've been in the job for 6 months and you have no clue because the position was open for the last 2 years and there's no historical record of anything, and you have 15,000 people on your list and you don't have a clue who they are. Okay, you're not alone. That happens all the time. But you need to find out, okay? Because you can't really make this work for you until you understand the inner angels in the people on the list. That's step one. Questions? Yes?
How do you find out?
How do you find out? Great question. How do you find out? How have some of you sort of done that investigative work on your lists? Yes.
I'm having experience now. I had been working part-time at my organization, now I'm full-time. And part of my full-time duties is I'm going to a lot of meetings in my community. And so I've always seen, joeglow@gmail.com, the name, the address, but I don't know anything about that person.
Right.
Now, at these meetings, it's like, oh, okay, I recognize the name. Now I see who they are. I see, I hear them speak. I hear what they're interested in, what motivates them.
You have to be a really good listener, and you have to ask a lot of questions when you have those opportunities to connect with people face to face. Other ways to do it. Yes, back here.
I haven't, unfortunately, not been able to do this myself, but I know that sending out supporter surveys to a segment of your list can be a really great source of.
Yeah, surveying, polling, especially if you're using a tool that integrates well with whatever database you're using so that you can use that information later to segment the list. People that answer a poll or survey a certain way. It's very nice if you can make that integration work. Yes?
We just recently started doing a user preference area where they can choose sort of what communications they want.
So like on a form on your website, somewhere on the page, they can actually make some choices about who they are, what they care about.
Yes.
Great. Other ways to do it? There are lots of different ways to do it, and you have to use lots of different ways to do it. It's always an ongoing process.
I guess also looking at the mission of the organization, right? So like what the mission is doing a lot about who you're, when you slot in, like who you're targeting.
Right.
So in that way, then you kind of know what their interests are and you can target those interests.
Right, and not everybody is going to be right for you. And so that's why it's okay to lose people off the list. You just want to make sure you're losing the right people, but losing the wrong people, whatever. The people who you can't figure out stuff that's relevant and that's really not a good match. Let's be okay with losing those people. Okay. So let's see. Let's go on to the second part of the book. So the first part of the book is really about like, what is this idea? How do we justify this? Why should we do it? Then we start to get into, okay, well, what does that mean? So the whole second part is really about the people. It's about the relationship building, because this really, really is dependent on you having a relationship with people. It's about trust. It's about relevancy in their lives. So the whole second chapter, or whole second part is about this. In the book, instead of using target audience, I use an even more horrific term in some ways, which is supporters, participants, and influencers, or your PSIs. So I don't really expect that to catch on. It's okay. But I had to come up with something other than target audience since I was railing about that. So I went with this. I had a deadline. It's done. It's over. Okay. Voice and style you want to be known for. Very, very important. If you're in a relationship, you have to know the part you're playing in that relationship. So we talk a lot about that. That gets into some brand strategy a little bit, but I really try to focus on the voice and style of the communications. And then there's a chapter on how to actually staff the content strategy. So let's look a little bit more at this concept of voice and style. In the book, I give you a couple of different places to start. I talk about positioning your organization as a helpful friend. and what that might look like in terms of the kind of content you produce for people. I talk about positioning yourself as a trusted expert. So maybe not so friendly, but maybe a little more on producing original research, really, getting quoted a lot in your trade press. There's a couple of other sorts of starting personalities that you can to work with. And I try to give you a lot of examples throughout the book of people doing this. We have over 100 different nonprofits in the book. So let me give you a couple of examples. Rachel Hicks is the Director of Programs and Communications at the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts, which is in Helena, Montana. She just basically goofed around on the Facebook page for a couple of years before she really figured out what she was doing and who her people were and what role she should really play in that relationship. What she ultimately found out is that it was the artist community, the people that were themselves practicing ceramic arts, not at the level as the people who have the residence program at the Bray, but fans and amateurs in ceramic arts. They were the people that were her most active people. So then once she figured that out, she's like, okay, well, what do I do for these people? What's my relationship with them? And what she discovered was that she could really be the conduit to the professional artists who were in residence at the Bray. And so she discovered that when she posted more of the kind of behind the scenes of the residents creating the art, she got a lot more engagement. And those people like talking about, oh, I've met so-and-so, or I went to so-and-so's show. They really like that idea of being able to connect to these artists. And so she really tries to facilitate that on the page now, and that's the relationship that she has with the fans, is letting them kind of behind the scenes with these artists that are at a sort of a higher level, okay? It's a very valuable role for her to play. Here's another example, Humane Society of the United States. I use them a lot as an example. And what Carrie told me, who's now the Deputy Director of their online communications, is that social media really allowed them to humanize the HUS brand, which used to be they were sort of like the stodgy animal rights people compared to people like PETA, for example. Okay, so social media really allowed them to put a more personal face on it, to bring a little more youth and vibrancy to the brand. And they do that in a number of ways. Carrie's in the book a bunch of different times. Another opportunity to connect and really figure out what your role is with people. This is from a very small community development organization. It's kind of your classic housing CDC. Amanda uses Facebook to try to be that helpful friend. That's really how she's positioning herself. So, her organization really wants to talk about things like, how to get a mortgage, how to make sure that you're working on your credit scoring so you can qualify for the right kind of financing. But she knows that just talking about that all the time and talking about their programming all the time isn't going to work. So she takes a content marketing point of view and figures out, how can I be helpful to new homeowners or even to people who are renting and wanting to buy a home? So she's helpful information all the time. She links to current events. Rainy day, I'll post about why it's important to clean your gutters. We've got a heat advisory this afternoon, 10 ways to keep cool at home, sans AC. Okay, she's positioning herself as a helpful friend on these sorts of issues so that when people are ready to talk about the money and apply for the loan, there's already that sense of trust. Okay, it's all about the voice and style. Questions about that so far? It's all in the book. Hurry now to the back where Amy can help you unlock all the secrets. Okay. Number 3, section 3. This is where we get into the hardcore planning. So those of you that want to know how to do an editorial calendar, this is your section. But I start with a couple of other documents before we get to the editorial calendar. We do something called the Big Picture Communications Timeline, deciding on your core topics, then your editorial calendar, how to repurpose your original content, and then how to make sure that you leave enough space so that you can merge in all the stuff that happens in the real world. Okay, so this is really about the planning process and putting all of this into place. Let's talk a little bit more about the core topics. So, how many of you have seen the broccoli and cheese thing? If you've been on webinar, okay, she's like, yeah, I know your broccoli and cheese thing already, okay. So be thinking about your example. I'm gonna need examples here in a minute. Okay, so the broccoli is what you want people to read. It's good for them. It would be so good for you, right? If they would eat your broccoli. Be good for everybody. It's so healthy. Why won't they eat our broccoli / read our newsletter / like our stuff on Facebook / comment on our blog posts all the time? Why won't they do that? It's so good for them and it's so good for us. Because they don't want broccoli, they want cheese. We like a lot of cheese. This is the reason I'm a vegetarian and not a vegan, is because of the cheese. Okay, we have to have the cheese. Are you still a vegan, Thomas?
I am.
How's that going, honey? He's like, boo cheese, yay broccoli, screw you. Okay. So we have the broccoli and the cheese. The cheese is what people want. Okay, and so what you really have to do is both. It's messy, but it's pretty tasty. And there's vitamins, and there's cheese. Often really bad cheese, but it's good, right? Okay, so you have to figure out what this is for your organization. So I like to use the Washington Trails Association. They present it at NTC, which is a fabulous conference, one of my favorites. And someone heard me speak about this ahead of time, and then she came up and said afterwards, I'll tell you what my cheese and broccoli is. So for the Washington Trails Association, they're advocating for money for trails, hiking trails, public parks, right? So what they really would love to do, if they could just sit you down, Jeremy, and have your complete attention, what they would do is, I'm sure he's tweeting about this. We'll check the timestamp later, Jeremy. Okay, so they would love to talk to you about fundraising and about advocacy, calling your representatives, doing all those things to be a good citizen, to support public parks and trails, okay? But guess what? People are not just like lining up and knocking down the door, oh, let me call my representative to advocate for trail funding, right? What are they probably asking for? Something called the Washington Trails Association. Why might you go to their website?
Trail map.
Maps, trail maps. What else? Which trails to use, where I can take my dog, my stroller, train for a triathlon, whatever, right? It's about the user experience of the trails. And so that is their cheese. They provide that to you, and then they try to get you to be an advocate and to fundraise and all the rest. Okay, they have to do both. The cheese is what really opens the door to the conversation for a lot of you. When you're talking about list building, you need to be all cheese all the time. Okay? And then you can start to weave in some of the broccoli. So let's hear some cheese and broccoli examples. I'm looking at you because you said you'd heard about it before. What's your cheese and what's your broccoli? She's like, don't pick on me. Okay. Anybody? Who's got cheese and broccoli? Farrah?
On the Big Duck Facebook page, anytime we post about an upcoming webinar or anything that we think is the goodness,
Yes.
the broccoli, not so much love. When we post somebody's baby or the food we're eating or the goofy things we're doing, lots of love.
And why would that be?
I think
Why,
people
Farrah,
like to
why?
see people behind the scenes, as you said earlier, the magic that happens, the excitement that
Right.
happens, the human side of our work, not just, hey, we've got
Right.
this resource for you.
Yeah, and you guys are brilliant, fun human beings, and we all want to be like you. So let's see what you're doing besides coming up with brilliant integrated marketing strategies. James?
So we had a recent campaign, and we offered people recipes created by famous chefs and by refugees, and those were fantastic, and people shared them and liked them. But then we asked them to pledge their support for the program, and they didn't so much like that.
Not so much. And you were like,
the cheese and the broccoli didn't really go over so well.
yeah, so what do you do about that? I mean, you guys have a pretty sophisticated operation.
Right.
So
what we did was we tried to take those people who really liked the recipes and the cheese and make it even easier for them to like the broccoli. So removed maybe microwaving or cooking the broccoli and just gave it to them in a way that they could digest it really easily.
Okay. Food metaphors are so fun to work with. We can take this pretty far, especially those of you that had a little wine. So let me know if you've got some good ones later. Okay. So you got to kind of figure this out for yourself. It's going to be different for all of you. It may be different for different segments on your list. This goes, again, back to knowing who your people are and what's the cheese and what's the broccoli for them. And it can change. It can change. I think I've actually got N10 in the book as an example of a nonprofit where some of the cheese and broccoli is changing. So it used to be that N10, well, it may still be true. I don't know. Amy, you can tell me if it's still true or not. But N10's broccoli was things like internet security and privacy issues. Some of you are still like, yeah, it's still broccoli. Okay, and what would be cheese from an organization like N10? On what?
Cat videos.
Cat videos, but like stuff on social media, right? Like anytime they do something on how to be awesome on Facebook, it's cheese. And then they try to like get you to talk about privacy and making sure that people can't hack your database and all that kind of stuff, but you don't really want to hear about that, right? Not yet. You will soon. You will soon. I believe at some point that will become cheese to you, but not yet.
Illustrating the broccoli, like with stories, could be cheesy the broccoli.
Yes, yes. Stories can be a good way to hide the fact that you're serving them broccoli. Yes. Melty. Stories can be that melty cheese that's probably not real cheese, but maybe just a little bit of cheese. Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Here's a couple of other examples. Any Grist fans in the room? Grist is an environmental news network. They gave me a great interview. One of the beautiful things about Grist is they really use humor as part of their voice and style. So I have a whole big case study on them in the book about the voice and style. What they really want to do is talk to you about climate change and advocating for public policies that are going to deal with climate change. Not the cheesiest topic necessarily, the sort of gloom and doom business of climate change. It's very depressing, the polar bears dying and drowning and all that. Not so interested in that, perhaps. So they do a lot of cheese. And like I said, there's a lot of humor in their cheese. But let's just take a look at a few of the things that they've done on transportation policy. Ooh, that's really exciting. You know, funding for mass transit. Woo, really good fun stuff, right? So what they do is they post a lot of pictures. Right here we have a whole series of photographs about dogs in cup holders. So this is just one puppy in a cup holder. There's a number of them. These pictures of pups in cup holders almost make us feel okay about cars. We admit you really can't do this on a bus. Okay, they also have this photo, which I really love. When you can make fun of people doing really egregious bad things, it's always fun, right? So this is the ultimate how to be a jerk on public transit photo. You have a picture of a woman on the London Underground. She has her shoes off, her skanky, nasty feet on the seat. She's taking 4 seats while she's laying down reading her book. She's eating. And you can't really see it, but like she's got her stuff spread out all over the floor too. Okay, so really bad behavior. So this is the cheese on Grist. Okay? Now, once you sort of get into their loop, they sort of start to sneak in this stuff about how to be a more responsible human being, make better transportation choices that are going to help save the planet. But they don't start with this. They start with the cheese. All right, next section of the book, section 4. Setting out on your marketing track. This is really about creating the content. In the last section, we talked about planning to create the right kind of content, figuring out what that content is. We know who we're communicating with from part 2. This is really about being a good writer, is what a lot of this is about. So I talk about relevancy, which we'll talk about in just a second. The kind of content that I think always works, like the go-to things for nonprofits. There's a chapter on curating content. I'm a really big fan of metaphors, can you tell? We have hiking, we have cheese and broccoli. There's like a million more in the book. And also humor. So there's a chapter where I talk about both of those as sort of your secret weapons. And then there's a chapter on technology and the importance of having a tech budget to really make this stuff rock. So let's talk a little bit more about relevancy. When I tell people in the nonprofit world, make your messages more relevant, they're like, great, fabulous, what does that mean? And so I was like, well, I don't know, let me think about it. And so I thought about it, and in addition to being a metaphor freak, I'm also an alliteration freak. So I was sitting on a plane, and I'm like, I can do this. I can come up with R's about relevancy. I can do this, I can do this. So I spent 3 hours on a plane doing it, and I came up with 6 R's. And so there's a whole chapter about this. So what I recommend you do is try to be at least one of these in everything that you publish. And if you can do a 2 or 3, then you're really in good position. But this is a nice little checklist that you can use with, like I said, everything you write. Is it rewarding in some way? Like, are the benefits really clear to the person of following through on whatever it is you're asking them to do? Is it realistic? Are you acknowledging that you probably have some things in the way, or that maybe there's some inconvenience or stigma associated with what you're asking people to do, and so you're acknowledging that and helping them with that? Is it real time? So does it make sense in the context of what's going on in their world today? Is it responsive? So we can tell that you've been listening. It's clearly something that people have been asking for or talking about, and it feels very responsive to them. It's revealing in some way, because we all like new stuff. We all like to think we know more than the person next to us. It's just sort of a natural human thing. And is it refreshing? And this is where I think humor can play a much bigger role in our sector than it does, and where really having a personality and having a real voice can be refreshing. It can catch people's attention, and in a good way. You know, it's really about standing out from the crowd and letting people decide for themselves if their values are aligned with yours. You know, you don't want everybody to be on your mailing list. You're going to waste a lot of money trying to communicate to everybody. You want very specific kinds of people on your list. And often, it's not like a demographic thing. I mean, for some of you, that's going to work. You know, your mission is to serve kids under 18. Great. You know, you've got some demographics there. You want those kids, you want those parents. But for a lot of you, it's more of the sort of the values, what they care about, how they choose to spend their time, what makes them angry, what makes them happy, the kinds of things they laugh at. And a lot of those things can really cross demographics. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or how old you are, or any of that. So, and sometimes it's a combination. But you want to figure out how to be refreshing to those people, okay? So this is how I define being relevant. And I talk about relevancy a lot in the book. And I go through each one of these in a chapter and give you real nonprofit examples of how to be all these things. Doesn't that sound like something you really want to read? We can help you with that. Okay, the last section of the book is all about the specific communications channels. So if you're, you know, if someone says, we really have to do a blog, and you're like, I don't know, why are we gonna do a blog? You can go to the blogging chapter, and we have 7 sort of do's, 7 sort of don'ts, and then we have 5 examples of people that are doing it well in some way. Okay, so again, very tactical advice, very do this, don't do this kind of stuff, and more examples on all of these different things. What else? Okay, so like I said earlier, I'm sort of churning out these worksheets. I'm going to make them even better and turn them into a workbook at some point in the spring. I don't know when I get around to it, but there'll be a companion workbook to help you actually do all this stuff in the book. We're going to do sort of like an online book club in February and March. So for those of you that have actually read it or will read it before, say, Christmas, I am trying to find a nonprofit to sort of sign up for each chapter and to help me be like the discussion leader on each chapter. I'll actually ask you to interview me for like 5 minutes, maybe on Google Hangout or something. I haven't really figured it out yet. But really a quick little interview about the chapter, a little discussion about the chapter, and then we'll do some broader webinars where we invite people to come talk. We're not going to do like, I think we'll do a video for each chapter, but we might do the webinars by parts or something. I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet. I got till February. I'll let you know. We're also going to do some e-clinics, which are going to be paid trainings for those of you that are ready to go more in depth on some of this, and I don't know what I'm doing with those yet either. We'll figure that out too. So here's how to stay in touch with me. Again, if you want the worksheets in their current format, you can opt in for that. It's pre-checked to opt into the weekly newsletter, which of course you can uncheck if you want. you do need to leave the worksheet thing checked in order to get those. And I'm happy to take any additional questions. If you're interested in working with me on the book club, we have a separate Facebook page. We have a separate website for the book, or you can just go to Nonprofit Marketing Guide, which is my main site. We'll be talking about that there as well. Any questions? Farrah?
Can you talk more about editorial calendars and planning content site as someone who works with nonprofits? I get that question a lot. Like, how do I actually make the time to do it? What should I say? How do I get other people to write or take pictures for me? Because I know that's what's hot on Facebook. So can you talk about that, please?
Right. So the first thing about editorial calendars is I think it's helpful to have a conversation about whether you and the people around you have spreadsheet brain or calendar brain. Like, do you want to look at this in a chart, like Excel type situation, or do you want to look at it on a calendar that, looks like a Google Calendar or Outlook calendar? I've found that having that conversation first actually helps with a lot of the other problems that you're mentioning. I'm working with a client right now whose staff is very spreadsheet brain, the management team is very calendar brain, and the management is completely frustrated by the spreadsheet because she can't see what's happening. She doesn't understand what her staff are doing. She doesn't understand how any of it is strategic or goal-oriented, and the staff are like, it's in the spreadsheet, but she just can't see it. And so they tried to do a calendar thing to make the management happy, and now their staff are like, I don't know what I'm doing. I need my spreadsheet, okay? So they're working on it. They're trying to figure out how to make that work. It has to work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how many days you sketch it out in advance. And you can use it for different things. So for example, the calendar that I use to run Nonprofit Marketing Guide, we use a spreadsheet for our longer term planning. So like right now, I'm planning out our webinar schedule for 2014. I'm doing that in a Google spreadsheet. And I have each row is a week. And then each column are sort of the categories of content. I mean, that's the other decision to make, is what's going to be on your rows and what's going to be on your columns. And it can be lots of different things depending on what you're having trouble seeing. The whole idea of the editorial calendar is to help you see things you can't really see just by winging it. So I talk in the book about lots of different combinations and how to do this. But the way, like I said, that we do it is we use a spreadsheet for the longer term. And then the daily calendar is a series of Google calendars. We have one for our email channel. We do it by channel. One for email, one for the blog because we blog daily. We have one for social. We don't have it broken out like Facebook versus Twitter. It's just sort of what we want to do in social generally. And we have a calendar for the event schedule. So things like speaking gigs and webinars are on that. I know it's a lot of calendars, but I can turn it all off if it's getting in my way. But that's what I use every day. I have one full-time employee. That's how we manage the company together on a daily basis, is those Google calendars. But when we get together to talk about what the next month is going to look like, or the next quarter is going to look like, or the next year is going to look like, we're in the spreadsheet. So you just have to find what works for you. I don't know. Did that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? It's 7:05. You have 25 minutes to make that stack of books disappear, people.
One was just purchased.
Great. Yes.
How would you say is a good way to convince your organization they need more sheets? So we have awesome content that everybody thinks everybody wants to read, and they all love it, but really,
Do they?
I mean, some people do, but I think some people need the cheese to get them to think, oh, that is great content, I would like to read that. So how would you, I don't know.
You're going to have vegans. You're going to have the vegans, Thomases of the world, that are just good with your broccoli. But that's only going to get you so far because most people, in fact, are not vegans.
Right.
So you have to really say, okay, are we achieving our goals or not? And if we're not, then we have to do something differently, right? We can't just do the same thing and expect people are suddenly going to get it. They're not. You're not being relevant to them. We all get to decide what's relevant to us. It's not that the people on your list are stupid or they don't care, they're no good. No, it's your problem. You're the problem. You haven't figured out how to be relevant to them. And when you do that, then you get different results. So yes, there are people who are going to be all good with what you're doing, but I wouldn't expect your results to change until you do something different. And I would suggest some cheese. You just have to figure out what your cheese is. Other questions? Yes.
I had this come up right as I was leaving work today. The suggestion whenever I'm doing any sort of online content marketing, anything is always like, should we put a donate button right at the top? That's always we want to donate all over it. And I know, I can look back at the analytics, no one ever clicks the damn donate button, right? Never, ever, ever, ever. I know that's not what the ask is. How would you respond to something like that? Do you think we should just put the button on there all the time?
We have some very savvy online fundraisers in the room. So how would you guys answer that question? What would your advice be? James, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I don't want to spill, but
No, please.
actually some of our most successful emails recently have been ones that have had no ask to donate. Do not anywhere on them even suggest that you should donate, but it was a compelling enough message that we could then track using, we have Salesforce, but we could then track that because of that message, people wound up donating for one specific message at double the amount that we raised from an email where we actually asked people to donate. So I think if you can have examples like that, and you can show those who are making decisions that you can raise money from something that's not asking you to donate. I think sometimes showing people and having proof and being able to back up what you're saying with some statistics can help the decision makers agree with you more rather than just saying, hey, we shouldn't have a donate button everywhere.
Anybody else want to chime in on advice? Yes.
Change the content in the emails, for example, is the way or using humor, as you said. What if we put the donate now button? So you put it, but right next to you, you put like next time. Now, what button would you click on? Donate now or next? I would definitely click on next to see what's going to happen. Now, because then on a Facebook page or anything else to interact with you, create a conversation. I don't know.
I think you want to experiment, and I think it's like the best practices, right? Which are what work for most people most of the time. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But I would say, generally speaking, if you want someone to donate based off of an email, the email needs to be very focused on that ask. Or you can go the other side, which is that you tell a really good story or you share some other compelling information, and the ask is very subtle. There's an example in the book of an email from the Washington Humane Society, and I know those of you that don't do puppies and kittens are just sick to death of the kitten and puppy people, but please just learn from them because you can do this too. But after Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, they're in Washington, D.C. now, mind you, they're not up here. They sent an email the day after. Now, they knew that doing a hard ask from a DC-based organization after Sandy would have been completely inappropriate, okay, because the real asking was taking place up here. So what they did instead was an update. We know a lot, because they did have some flooding. It was minor flooding, okay, but they had some flooding. And so they said, well, sure, a lot of you are concerned about the animals. We wanted to let you know that we had even more staff than usual spending the night. There were sleeping bags everywhere. They had 2 photos. They had one of a kitty sleeping in a little, one of those little cat tree things, and it was next to a window, and you could just see the rain just pelting the window. So it was obvious that it had been taken during the storm. And they also had a picture of a woman walking a dog the morning after, and she's totally in her rain gear, and she's got her big galoshes on, and there's puddles everywhere, and the dog's just like, woo, happy dog being outside in the rain. So they had a very subtle link in one of the paragraphs, and it raised a lot of money. I mean, not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was thousands without a real ask. It was like, your support makes this possible, support hyperlinked to donate page. Thank you for your concern for the animals. We're doing great, blah, blah, okay? So I think you kind of have to go one or the other. If you try to do it in the middle all the time, I think that's less of a best practice. I'm sure there's some of you that have made it work just fine because there's always these outliers, right, on all of this stuff. But if I was advising you, I would say go one way or the other and quit trying to do the middle business. Yes?
I would also just add that it might be useful to just offer other opportunities to help the organization that don't all involve donations. You become a volunteer.
Yes, absolutely.
Other ways that people can get involved in this way. They may eventually donate anyway, but in the meantime, at least engage with you in some manner.
And that's really speaking to the inner angel again. Really understanding who these people are and why they're on your list. They're not just there to write you checks. Now, yes, there are some of your donors that just want to write you a check on December 31st and be done with it and be happy that they do that. Fine. But there's a lot of people on your list that are looking for a little more. And sometimes you can meet those needs just through really good communications. Sometimes you need to offer them physical experiences like volunteering for you or advocating for you in some more aggressive way. So, but again, it goes back to knowing who your people are and what they want from that relationship with you and what you can deliver as part of your side of the relationship. Yes?
I wanted to go back to your broccoli cheese metaphor. And I mean, my organization is very, very good at shoving broccoli down people's throats. That's all they do. And so, and they're definitely afraid of not shoving the broccoli in everybody. So what are some of the tactics you use to try, when you don't have data, when you don't have numbers to be able to show people, what are some of the tactics that you use to try and get them to step away from the broccoli?
Well, I want to know a little bit more. So like in terms of the personality that you're trying to, like, do you want to be seen as sort of like a technical expert, for example, where it's important for you to be like, yes, we're doing this research, yes, we're making these claims and proving these claims about whatever it is in the world?
No. We offer programs. So for instance, we have a health and wellness center. So
So you're doing direct service.
But we're always going to our classes, sign up for classes, instead of telling people how good yoga is or how good it can help you if you have certain medical.
Okay.
We're moving in the direction that you said about being helpful.
Right.
But they're so afraid that if we don't put 10 on every email, that our registration numbers are just going to drop.
Okay. So this is a very common problem. You're not alone. I am a bit of a kind of person. And so I don't, some of you can get away with it, some of you can't. Some of you can change your newsletter without asking and then see how it goes and then say, hey, guess what? The last couple newsletters I did this thing different and it worked. Now, if you have like eagle eyes on you all the time and you have to get every little thing approved, that may not be so easy. What I would do in that case is just ask for permission to do an experiment, to try something, to say that you have invested a lot of your personal energy in becoming more educated about best practices, and a lot of smart people have suggested that this might be a better approach. So why don't we try it for a month? Why don't we try it for a quarter and see what happens? And if all hell breaks loose and the world comes to an end, then you'll take full responsibility for it. And it won't happen because you'll end up breaking even or doing better. It's a very unusual case where you follow best practices and your whole thing implodes. So, it just depends on the people you're working with and kind of what your relationships are. Vera.
Say in that case, you can also try as an in-between, if you're not as adventurous as Kivi. You could try splitting the list, so send out the typical newsletter and send out the other version and do that a few times and see what works. The other thing you can try doing is, I often find when you have a lot of resistance, get them jealous, show them what your peers are doing, that your list is also on, your community is also on, and say, look at all these things they're doing, this is what our donors, our supporters, our members are also seeing. So if we want to try and keep up with the Joneses, we've got to change it up.
Yes. It's basic psychology a lot of the time. So if there's fear, like you're saying, then use the fear to your advantage. Scare them by what everybody else is doing.
Exactly.
Right? I know a bunch of you have to leave for another event, so I'm not going to be hissing at you as you walk out the door or anything. I appreciate you coming. Thank you. And my checkout girl is also leaving too. Amy, thank you so much for having me.
Books, people. Let's do it right now.
I tell you what, I'll take questions for 5 more minutes, and then that way I'll have a 10-minute window before I actually have to leave the building myself. Yes.
So what if you are a new organization? So would you find stores or would you find
I would think hard about both. And no, I mean, they work together, right? I mean, if you only give people cheese, that's really not very healthy, is it? I mean, so I think you want to do both. But you usually want to start a conversation with a new person with cheese on your list, and then figure out like when you can start giving them the broccoli. But you need to know what your broccoli is. You don't want to just be kind of fluff, right? I mean,
usually broccoli is one of the favorites. And people feel that, oh, I already know this, I don't eat this because I already know this, but the cheese is usually what's
the cheese tends to be the things that are just people have more of a positive visceral reaction to because it's funny or they relate to it or they relate to it. They see themselves in it. It's like, oh God, I have that problem too. Or I had that experience too, or I feel that way about my mother-in-law too, or whatever it is. And it's relevant to them. You just have to kind of figure out, what it is for your organization. But I would try to get broccoli in there fairly quickly. I mean, like I said, you don't want to be known for just cat videos. There's got to be some broccoli. Couple more questions? Thomas?
Pitching humor should be a little bit of a tricky thing.
It can be.
For some organizations who haven't thought about their personality, they kind of take on the personality of whether it's doing their social media. And
Yes.
that person leaves, and all of a sudden the next day it's like a totally different organization.
Yes. Personality transplant overnight, yes.
Exactly. So do you have suggestions to have maybe to be more consistent in that and not have that be so obvious it's all about that person and not about the board? Or?
Yeah, I mean, longer term, this is a long-term thing, right? Relationships are always a long-term thing. So long-term, if you're like the social media person, you really want to transition yourself into more of the role of coaching everybody in your organization to understand social media so that if you get the swine flu, get hit by a bus, get a better job, whatever, other people can they can take a shot at it and have it not be completely awful. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book is the role, how the role of a communications director is evolving when you do your marketing this way. And that's a big part of it, is really sort of coaching people on how they can be more helpful to you if you really are sort of the one through the gatekeeper, but also so that they just sort of get it themselves, so that it's not this stark divide if something happens to you. Yes?
For us, we just have a lot of most of the team tweeting at the same time, and then we have our own internal setup. I work for Volunteer Action. We have our own internal setup, like evergreen content, things that are always going to be relevant, that we can kind of keep peppering to maintain like a consistent voice. And then have like our own internal set of best practices for our audience, so that way that there wasn't a drastic change in voice depending on who's tweeting or posting on Facebook and stuff like that.
And I think it's okay to have multiple voices. It's harder because there needs to be enough consistency so that there's not sort of this confusion about the kind of organization you are and whether you're serious or not. But if you read Grist, for example, they have a lot of people that write for them, and if you really follow it, you'll start to see that there are some people that are just much more cheeky than others. There are some people that are pretty snarky. And, they sort of have their own style, but it all kind of works together in the direction that Grist is trying to go. So that's another way to approach it, too.
I saw Tammy Gordon, who heads up social media at AARP, speak recently, and she mentioned that they have a character, I think it's Rhoda, who's basically a member of their community. So it's sort of like personifying the user persona, the audience profile of the person who might be on the list. And basically every time they write, they sort of say, what would Rhoda say? What would Rhoda think? So they've sort of taken a persona that would relate to the organization and use that voice to guide what they post on Twitter or Facebook.
That's a great example. Yes, Norman.
Have you encountered any organizations that seem to be not that interested in actually monitoring what's working and what's not, but they send out all this stuff, but they don't really pay attention to the stats to show what content is really.
That happens? I can't imagine that happening. What are you talking about? Yes, of course. I mean, some people don't care, don't want to know. The thing is, if you know, then you might have an obligation to do something about it, right? I mean, there's just some people that just don't want to know because they don't want to have to change. There are other people who feel like they're just humming right along and they're too busy doing other things, right? So, I mean, I would try to figure out kind of what's the psychology there, and if there's something that can still work for them that can work for you if you're the one that's interested in maybe paying a little more attention to those things. They might not like numbers. I mean, it just could be a million different things. So I think you got to go a little deeper. One more question. Who wants the last question? No one? All right, then we're done. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you.